Hey guys, I'm John Schwartz. So my friend Ryan Gillett and I sat down and um, had a conversation that we really wanted to share. And I just want to do this little intro to give a bit of context for what was going on for us and what we were talking about. Um, we're both we've both been trained in MMA and jiu-jitsu and wrestling and stuff like that for many years, and we both kind of coincidentally were having some really similar thoughts about some of the difficulties of these sports, particularly in regards to brain injury and the significant impacts that can have and how little that's sort of talked about. And we really wanted to sit down and talk about that sort of stuff, to share it and get it out there, because it's so often just sort of not spoken about. Some context of what was going on before this conversation is Ryan was over in Thailand for 3 months as a sponsored athlete, training MMA every day, and over there was fighting, and he'd just come back and was in a really difficult spot. There'd been some really kind of harrowing experiences over there with one of the fighters, Sai, lapsing into a coma after a Muay Thai, a kickboxing fight over there, and that was really devastating to Ryan and to all the people training over there. And at a kind of coincidental similar time, I myself was going through some real difficulties with some, like over the last 2 years, with issues with my thinking and cognitive stuff that seemed to be from either recurrent concussions or some kind of damage from all these years of doing this sport that we both love. And so we were both in just this kind of difficult but similar situation. So we sat down and had this conversation. So I hope it is useful to someone, because it's something I think we both wish we'd heard probably 10 years ago. So enjoy.
I mean, you and me, we've been training together for, must be like a decade now, doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, mixed martial arts, wrestling, obsessively, basically. And
Yeah.
I mean, now we're together, we're running Canberra MMA, doing PTs and stuff like that in MMA, and we're coaching other people. Yeah, and you've been a big part of the scene here in Canberra and kind of growing that. It's a pretty fledgling MMA scene in Canberra, but you've been a big part of it. But yeah, it's a hard thing trying to introduce someone that you've known for so long. Like,
Yeah, that's right.
You're a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, you've been wrestling for years, you've been doing MMA for years, you've just gotten back from a 3-month stint where you were a sponsored athlete with Absolute MMA over in Thailand, so you're part of the pro team over there. And an all-round good dude. I think that's...
Thanks, man. Thanks, man.
That's an introduction.
Yeah, well, John as well. John's a black belt in jiu-jitsu who, like we've said, we've known each other for 10 years, pretty much been training constantly and obsessing with each other about this sport. And not only through jiu-jitsu, I think it started in jiu-jitsu where we first started to train a lot together, but then we formed a special friendship when both of us started to wrestle. Like, you definitely wrestled more, and then I saw you competing in MMA, and that was a thing that I really wanted to move into as well. Like, I saw the way that you competed, and I wanted to compete like that as well. I wanted to do, I think, martial arts in the beginning to like make myself like tougher or whatever, you know what I mean? But I think with you, I saw that I wanted to, compete a certain way and stuff like that, and that's what I gained from like our training in the early days and stuff like that. And then we were lucky enough to help each other through heaps of MMA fights. Like, I remember meeting you on Fridays and us just going like hammer and tong on the ground, like you starting in good positions on me, and then slowly either we'd switch or whatever. If you got a sub or got an escape, we'd switch for a more dominant position for you or whatever. And I really liked, and that was my first introduction to training like a combat sports, really, with you, like a combat sports like MMA. And we always were helping each other with that, like whether it was through our own fights or our friends' fights or whatever. And yeah, John's a really good black belt, really high level in wrestling as well. Undefeated as a pro in MMA, is 2-0, and you've beaten some good dudes as well. And also has been there for all of the hard training, for all of the stuff that I did, which has been a real help, and it's been great having John around. But yeah, I think the why we're doing this is, like, for me, I think I'm just trying to unpack a lot of stuff to do with like the mental aspect of the sport, and also, you know, I'm very worried about this brain injury stuff that's going around. Like, you sent me a link today. Another chick died. What was her name again? She died.
I
Katie.
turned my phone off, but yeah,
Katie Collins or something, was it?
Yeah,
Like, she passed away today. So it's one of those things, and I just come back, and Sai had had a aneurysm, it sounds like, and a stroke in Thailand, but probably tell that story a bit later. But this is pretty much why we're here, and you've got your stuff as well that you're going through.
yeah. It sounds like because you just came back like a week ago,
Yeah.
and just kind of this serendipitous thing where we're both kind of on the same wavelength, thinking about this stuff at the same time. Because I mean, it's something that I'd been thinking about for a couple of years now. Just the sport that we do and how much I love it, but just some of the impacts it can have on your brain and on those kind of capacities. And it's sort of I remember we had a really in-depth conversation about it, and I just remember coming away from that and thinking, fuck, I wish I'd had that conversation 10 years ago. Or, God, I wish a lot of the guys who I now know coming up in the scene had been there for that conversation. Or I wish that I had the time to sit down with each of them and have that chat to them. Not because it's all doom and gloom and I want to disparage the sport, because the sport's done more for my life than so many other things. Like, it's done so much good. But just because you don't have the time to have those conversations, and you don't, you often, like, you sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason too I wanted to talk and record this, is just I can almost guarantee, because I know myself pretty well, that I'll start to sweep this stuff under the rug again in 2 months'
for sure.
time, you know, like when it's fresh. And because, I mean, for me, I've been going through these kind of recurrent concussions, or I'm not sure exactly what it is. It's been going on for 2 years, or I've been having impacts on my memory and things like that. And my suspicion is it's the wonderful sport that we do. And it's such an easy thing to sweep under the rug and not think about, because it's incredibly painful to think about, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's worth talking about it and getting it out there. Not so much for me, but for, you know, if one other person listens to this and it changes the way they think about training, or just changes them maybe being a bit more sensible, then fuck, that's work done. Like, I'm happy with that. Or if it helps me figure out this in my own head a little bit better too, because there's this bittersweet kind of thing where you love this, you know, you love fighting and you love all the really hard parts of it, but then to see these things happen to people you love, or to feel these things happen to you yourself, it's hard to find a spot for that in your head, like hard to find a spot where that makes sense alongside of it.
Yeah, I'm very, very on with that as well. You know what I mean? Like, and especially seeing you go through this as well has been terrible, and made me think of a couple of things, like to do with the way that I trained. You know what I mean? And how we trained and how we got to this position, because it is one of those things. You know, the sport, I think, like, will gather like tough people to it or whatever, or people that will push through stuff like this. But I always thought in my head that I was recognizing that, you know, this stuff could happen to me, you know what I mean? I was weighing up the risks, and that's why I was mentally strong, you know what I mean? And that's how I got to fights, because I was processing the fact that either on fight night something bad might happen to me, you know what I mean? I'm going to fall over, hurt my neck, like get taken down, hurt my neck or something, or maybe in 10 years, you know, I might be a bit slower or something. But I'm like, the more that I think about it now, I don't know whether I was being tough about that, or whether I was just getting really good at pushing it away, you know what I mean? Like, you push away so much stuff with the sport to get good at it in the first place, you know what I mean? Like, time with family and friends, relationships, whatever, you know what I mean? Food, when you're cutting weight, you push away the thought of that, and I can't have food, you know, because you're cutting weight.
Yeah.
And then maybe you just get so good at pushing away that I kind of lied to myself a little bit that I'd understood. And with this stuff that happened to Sai, I've definitely I've definitely started to think that now, and with you as well. You know,
And look, the stuff I've been experiencing is minor. Like it's in the grand scheme of things, it's minor. Like I know guys who are going through a lot worse than what I'm going through, and obviously poor Si is going through, you know, a factor of hundreds of what I've gone through. But I don't know. It's kind of good to be aware of it and notice these things and talk about them, even when they're subtle. Because if you don't, then you know they'll get worse.
So,
But maybe you can. Do you want to introduce like what happened with Si? Because I mean, if you're comfortable with it, like
that's fine. So without like it's kind of hard to talk about, but the main thing about what happened with Si was that he was just in a Thai fight in Bangkok, and he got dropped a couple of times in the first round, and then went on to the second, third, and fourth, and the doctor ended up stopping it because of a cut, so he went out the back, and it was when he was out the back that we figured that he's had a massive brain aneurysm, or there was some kind of bleeding on the brain. And we're not sure, it's very up in the air about what's actually happened because it was only, 2.5 weeks ago. But they're saying that it might have been a pre-existing clot that kind of got shook loose there that made the stroke happen. And that was just a very, very, very sad thing to happen to Si, because now Si's in a coma in Bangkok, and, friends and family and Absolute MMA are trying to bring him home. But it was also a very real moment for me as well, where those things that maybe I was pushing away came to the forefront of my mind, and coupled with the fact that I had to fight 2 days later, it got me thinking about a lot of stuff to do with the sport, and what we were doing to each other, and whether I could have done it better, or how I would do it better, or would I do it again. You know what I mean? Obviously I did do it again because I fought 2 days later, but it also gave me the thoughts of why I'm doing this, you know what I mean? And, that certain toughness aspect, and I was looking at all of that kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Why I was doing this, and, what we were doing to each other. It was a very hard thing to I'm still trying to unpack a lot of stuff to do with it, but one of the things that I came across was that the sport is inherently, for people that will just keep going, you know what I mean, or whatever, but people comment whether somebody's tough or not, whether they get up, but I think that's an inherent part of fighting as well, you know what I mean? I think that was a part of who I thought that I was as a fighter, you know what I mean, that I could get up and I could keep going, and that was a choice of mine, but through the years and years of fighting, I feel like it's just fighting, you get in there and you get up, you don't have a choice in that. I was very, very scared before my last fight, and I still got in there and I got dropped a bunch, but I still kept getting up, even though that I was scared, and I was fully aware of what had happened to Si, and I was quite scared that, you get an irrational fear before fighting anyway, that maybe this was going to happen to me as well, because I'd been knocked out a little bit in the gym. You never really know what's going on with your brain, you know what I mean? I've said to a couple of people during the week, it's not like a cut, that you can see either festering, infected, or whatever on your arm, or whether it's healing or how bad it is. It's your brain. It's kind of hard to tell, you know what I mean? So then when you think to yourself about what you've done, and, and the effects that's going to have on you, the effects that it had on Si, that poor fella, he had no idea that was going to happen to him, you know what I mean?
Because he was 23, right?
Yeah, 23 years old,
Yeah.
He'd had a bunch of pro boxing fights, and some kickboxing fights, and some MMA fights as well, but he was a lovely dude, and he just didn't have any idea that this was going to happen to him, you know what I mean? Through the sport that we all love so much. He was just kind of out there chasing his dreams, you know what I mean? And I think that I could see that in a lot of people that I trained with, you know what I mean? Not only Si, but in you, and in a couple of the young people. There's a certain thing with this, everybody has the dream, to chase their dreams, you know what I mean? And for this to happen to him just seems so unfair, you know what I mean? And I'm struggling to figure out why this has happened and what I could do to change it, but also how I would change things going forward, maybe, considering brain injury and the hard rounds that we did, and all that kind of thing. Because in the whole scheme of things, I don't feel like I've had a career in fighting as much. I've had 5 fights now, but I only kind of was fighting when I felt like it, you know what I mean? Like when I felt like I had to prove my skill, or there was something to do with the, you know, there was some element of the business towards it, you know what I mean? Because I wanted to legitimize myself so I could become a good coach. But, you know, it's just kind of hard to, you know, figure out why you're doing that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now. And, like, how I would, you know, go about changing that next time with the people that wanted to do the same things as me. Because we didn't really know, you know what I mean? Like, there were some weeks there where we were doing, like, boxing sparring, kickboxing sparring, and MMA sparring that were all fairly hard, you know what I mean? And, like, multiple rounds.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we were pretty careful throughout, because at least then, like, there was some knowledge, but still, you know, there was kind of, I guess the scary thing is, and I mean, the thing with size, I mean maybe it's he's really unfortunate, and it was blood clotting. It was some pre-existing condition, so we don't know. Like, neither of us are doctors, but we do know that the sports we do cause damage to the brain in certain people. Like, it's a thing that happens. Like, you can only take so many knocks to the head. Yeah, they're not made to be knocked. And I guess, because even when you and me, like, and Jimmy and, you know, all those guys together, is had a little bit of an idea, but for me, I tended to think, if I don't get staggered, or if I don't get knocked out, then there's no damage done. You know, but that's, I mean, you look at the science now, and that's really not really the case. Like, there's a decent amount of evidence coming out now that it's those subconcussive kind of blows to the head, those repeated blows to the head without recovery, that do damage over the longer run. And that's like this CTE stuff, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's
and I don't think they can MRI for that or anything. That's one of those things that they find out, you know, after you die, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the one
CTE.
that became really famous in NHL players in the United States, is they were just getting these, they were not aging well, to put it lightly. Like, they were getting to old age and they were just falling to pieces. Their memory was shot, their decision making was poor. Some of them were even getting really significant, like, hallucination symptoms, huge amounts of irritability, explosive mood, like personality change. And then they started discovering this thing that they could measure after death by looking at the actual brain, and they were finding their brains were fucked up, basically. Which is a sad thing, because, like, they sure as fuck didn't know. They had no idea. They were going in tackling. I mean, there was some worse stuff there where they were getting, like, knocked out and then put back on the field and stuff like that in the early days. But even then, like, even for those subconcussive ones where it wasn't so bad, they still have these detrimental effects. And for me, that's the scariest thing, is that brain injuries aren't the same as injuries to your body and your limbs and stuff like that. So I'll preface this, I'm not a doctor, I'm a psychologist, so I know a decent amount about the capacities of the brain and the different functions. And I think that's partly why I've been, I've been pretty touchy about this stuff that I've been noticing myself. I've been keeping, like, a laser eye on it, because I think about that stuff a lot. And I mean, I don't have a fucking face for modelling, so I really do need all my, you know, I'm not going to be in the UFC, and I don't have a face for modelling, and I can't make shit with my hands, so I need my brain for the stuff I do, for the coaching stuff I do, and for the other work I do as a psychologist. So I think about this stuff a lot. But the awful thing about injuries to the brain is there's often these lagging indicators. So if you break your knee, you know about it immediately.
Yeah.
But if you get brain damage, like, you often don't know for a year or two after. Like, you have this, you don't get the symptoms until well after, and that's really fucking unfair. In my opinion, that's really unfair. Like, that's and I mean, and that's partly the suspicion, I think, is what has been happening with me is just years and years of wrestling, of just tackling my head over and over into people's hips, and just getting snapped down on the head constantly. I think that's sort of caught up with me a little bit, and it's the same thing. Is you don't realise it in the moment, because you go home, you'd be a little bit sore, but you're not necessarily going home with a headache or anything like that. But then a couple of years later, then you start to notice, I can't really do math in my head very well anymore, or I'm forgetting people's names, or I'm a little bit more irritable. I'm forgetting events, I'm forgetting entire conversations, so for me, that's the really difficult thing about these brain injuries. Like there's the really catastrophic ones that are immediate and devastating, and then there's the chronic, slow creeping in ones, and both of them I think we don't talk about enough, and we don't.
No way.
Yeah. How many times have you and me hit each other in the head?
Oh, so much. So much.
How many fucking times, right? Like,
it's retarded. Like when you think back at it, you're like, that was pretty crazy. You know what I mean? Like, to do that to each other, and like you said, it's like maybe it's that thing with MMA that's going to come to the forefront because of all the wrestling. You know what I mean? All the snap downs. If you mix that, with Jimmy preparing for fights, me preparing for fights, like all the rounds that you did helping us. You know what I mean? And then every now and then you do have those slobber knockers in there, you know what I mean? Whether they're training, whether they're whatever. So it's the small ones, and then it's the other ones as well, I think it's all just adding up,
And I reckon most of it happens in the training room too. It's like...
Well, that's what I was saying before. I struggle to see how I had a career in MMA as such, because I've only had like 5 fights. But even so, the amount of fights...
Think of all the guys you've prepped.
Oh, all the guys I prepped, all the fights that we took and never came through, you know what I mean? Whether they were last minute, whether, it was helping other people. Sometimes the crazy wars, like not crazy wars, but the people that come into the gym that go hard, and you just go, oh, well, this is what we're doing today. You know what I mean? Like, we're just going hard.
Yeah.
And, it's just years and years of that. I remember when I first started boxing, one of the fellas that I trained with, he knocked me down 3 times in a I think we did 4 rounds. Like, the coach wasn't there at the time or whatever. It was at an old place that we used to do sparring at on Fridays. But that guy knocked me down with headshots 3 times in...
When you started.
Like 4 rounds. When I started,
Yeah.
And you just think back to yourself, you're like, I would never do that. Like, I wouldn't even do that, before the whole concussion things come to the forefront of my mind, you know what I mean? I'd maybe drop somebody in sparring, like with a body shot or something. But definitely if it was the head, I'd, you'd need to pull the, pump the brakes kind of thing, you know what I mean? So not only do you have to navigate how hard you go with your friends, you know what I mean? It's those rounds like that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it takes another kind of strong person as well to say no, to say, I'm not doing this, this is not what I'm doing. This is not why I'm here, you know what I mean? And so there's a bunch of things to try to unpack here. There's the things that you can't help, you know what I mean, that you can try to mediate as much as you want. And there's the things that you get caught up in, like the hard sparring rounds, or, you know what I mean?
It's so funny you say that, because I think my first experience of boxing was pretty much the same. Like, forced into a situation with a guy much bigger than me. And I remember it was a drill we had to do where we had to go forearm to forearm. So, almost forehead to forehead, and just fire. Just go. Hooks, uppercuts, everything. The only rule was you're not allowed to step backwards.
Yeah.
And I was shit. Like, I was, I knew jiu-jitsu and wrestling at that point. I was a terrible boxer.
Yeah.
And so I was just getting clobbered. And I remember after that, just like sitting in the car, and my whole body was just shuddering.
Yeah.
Like, but then I was just like, well, I guess that's
this
it. Sport.
You know what I mean?
And
Strap the
next
gloves
day,
on and go.
Felt all right, no worries, back into it. But that shit adds up. Like, your brains aren't like the rest of your body, where you take it's not like shin conditioning, where you kick a tree a bunch of times, your shin hurts, and then it heals back stronger the next day.
No way.
It's not like, it's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
It gets weaker each time. So Yeah, and I reckon if we spoke to everyone about what their first experience with I mean, we're given striking martial arts a hard time, but like, because there's definitely some fucking hard head knocks in wrestling and stuff like that.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, I reckon if you talk to a lot of people about what their first experience is, you'd hear it's similar. Like,
it just seems
brutalized.
like madness. You know what I mean? That it's kind of happening like that, and it's the same stuff that I think about now as well. Like, you know, I'm thinking about how to teach this sport. You know what I mean, and how I could morally teach this sport, and I think about sometimes I think like what would happen if I stepped away. You know what I mean, and I think it would be a big shame and. Like I did put a lot of work into, like the last few years have been doing all the things that I had to do to be a really good coach, you know, whether it was like always thirsting for knowledge, like training, you know, taking fights and this going to Thailand thing and all of that. And I think like, you know, I could just step away from the sport, but it's almost like if I do, it's like sentencing the sport to the madness that continues, you know what I mean? Like one of the guys that looks up to me just... You know, he continues going through the same motions because the sport just spits people out like that, I think, a little bit. You know what I mean? That's why I think this conversation's a good one to have as well because I'm pretty sure it just does spit people out and then they're gone. Like, they don't come back to these sports, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's good now that we're talking about this and can...
Yeah, that's true. Like, there's definitely an element of guys come in, do 5 years or more or whatever, but then they fuck off.
Yeah,
like they're just busted, gone... and out of there. And I think that's partly the protective mechanisms of the sport is like people who do it for 30 years, they're either wearing a lot of damage or they're like, you know, your Floyd Mayweathers who just, they're not taking those shots to the head, or they've found really good ways to avoid it, or they're just so damn skillful that they're not taking that damage. But yeah, it definitely spits people out. Like, there's only so much you can take of that stuff, I think. But I mean, it's hard in a bunch of other ways too. You know, like you're saying no to a lot of social events, and you know you're neglecting your poor partner, and it doesn't exactly make you rich.
No,
like there's a lot of sacrifices. I mean, but it's fucking heaps of fun. You know?
Yeah, that's right. And the people that I've met through this sport, I swear to God, are the most interesting, driven, sometimes relaxed, sometimes a little bit crazy or whatever, you know what I mean? But the range of people that I've met through this sport is amazing, you know, and then the help that we've got, like even the people that we've trained with, you know what I mean? Like Kevin from the States, like whenever I go there now, I'm always hit him up and I'm always sending him messages like the next time I come, you know, he gave me his couch to sleep on the last time I was there. You know, you only really find this in this community, you know what I mean, of a bunch of people struggling, you know. And I think that a lot of what this sport gives me is so good, but and I think that's why it's hard to look at the bad things. You know what I mean? It's hard to take this and think this is a serious thing. You know what it does to your body, and you know you might even talk of the 3 knee surgeries and stuff that I've had. You know what I mean? You've had knee surgeries as well. Like, I'm pretty sure my shoulder's jacked. Like, it's pretty crazy what this sport's done to you. You know what I mean? And I remember even when my knees first started popping when I was like blue belt. I was just like, oh, that's pretty weird, you know what I mean? That should be right. And by purple belt, you know, it got real bad, you know, just because I didn't recognise it. So definitely this is something that, with the brain thing, I can't let this go past. Not with you going through what you've gone through, not with me having witnessed, you know, the tragedy that, you know, happened to Sai. You know, this is something that we need to constantly think about, you know, I think, and make people aware of.
Yeah.
And even in coaching, you know what I mean? Like, there's no way I'm doing those rounds. And I think such an emphasis, like you said, the people that are in the sport are the people that aren't getting hit, you know what I mean, that can stick around. So these are the people we need to emulate, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Doing the kind of rounds that they're doing, you know, talking or listening to people like for us, Sahabi, when they said to us 2 years ago, you know what I mean? Don't do those hard rounds, you know, once you know that you can do the hard rounds, you know you can do them, you know that you can take a shot. So do more light rounds. I think if there's a path where we can teach this and feel good about ourselves and protect people as best we can from a clearly brutal sport, you know what I mean? It is brutal already, and if it wasn't so brutal, probably we wouldn't find it so fascinating.
But that's an interesting thing about for us though, like, which is if for anyone listening, that's George St. Pierre's coach, among other people over in Canada. We met him when he was in Sydney. He talks about how much sort of light sparring they do. And I know Marco was over there, and he said, George St. Pierre was kind of like, he wasn't brutal in his rounds, even when he was doing fight prep and stuff like that. And I think that's the kind of, that's a bit of a hidden thing about MMAs, that the training that the fighters you adore are doing isn't actually always the brutal thing you think it needs to be. The fights are brutal, but I mean, a lot of them are doing light sparring. A lot of them are dialing their sparring back so that it's only during their fight camp, which is 6 weeks every certain amount of months. It's not constant hard rounds. But you go into we go into a lot of MMA gyms, like just in your normal town, and they're doing hard rounds every week. Everyone's doing them every week. So it's funny, because I think people watch the sport and they think it's got to be brutal, it's got to be hardcore, but actually that's not the way it needs to be, and that's actually not the way guys who are doing really well are actually doing it either. In fact, I've even noticed, because you and me, we've coached jiu-jitsu and done jiu-jitsu and done wrestling, we've trained at heaps of different places, different countries and stuff like that. I think I've always noticed is as soon as you put the label MMA on a class, everyone goes psycho. Yeah. Like if I run a jiu-jitsu class, even you go to a striking class and people are all right, but as soon as you call something an MMA class, you get people who come into the class and they want blood. Yeah. And
just bleed.
Yeah. Like I remember I was doing jiu-jitsu with one guy, and we were rolling real light, we were having fun, we were doing stuff like that, and we're like, all right, now we're going to start, the coach, the teacher at the time, the coach said, all right, now we're going to swap over to MMA class. And so the next class, we were doing basically the same position, we were doing some jiu-jitsu grappling on the ground, and he immediately started picking me up off the ground and slamming me, like on these thin mats. And like there was nothing.
Like, what is happening? Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's like, oh right, because this is MMA. Then all of a sudden, this is about just harming people. Yeah. It's like all of a sudden you forget that they're your training partners, and actually you need them to survive these fight camps to keep training with you. It's funny. It's been marketed as a brutal sport, but that's I think it's costing it in some ways. Because I remember you told me really interesting about how the Thais train like over there, like how gentle they often are in their sparring. I've heard this from multiple people and I've seen it. Like it's they're not slobber knocking each other in sparring.
No, they're like laughing, sparring without mouth guards. You know what I mean? And there's a bunch of them that have had 300 plus fights, and they're still like cognitively like seem like they're pretty good. They're all fairly beaten up as well. You know what I mean? Like with knees and hands and shoulders and whatever. But yeah, you're exactly right. Like I remember when I first started, it was my thing that I didn't really care. It was a thing that I had to fix. I didn't really care about being on the bottom, because all the beginners that I sparred with, which was basically all that we had in the beginning until we had enough fights to get better. But as soon as I'd be on the bottom, it was a joke that like people, if they had gloves on, they would just try to whack me as hard as they could. You know what I mean? And it was like, I fell into my game good because I would just armbar them, you know what I mean? But I'm like, what is some dude overstretching so much that he's punching me, you know what I mean? With such force that it's easy for me to then arm lock him, you know what I mean? It's just like people can't help themselves, like as soon as they hear that MMA thing. Yeah. They're just like, must kill, must punch. Yeah. But yeah, I think just before I left, I said to everybody at the Canberra MMA sparring events that we hold, like your training partner is the most important person in the room. And you hear that a little bit, you know what I mean? But, the more that I think about that, the more I accept that that's true, you know what I mean? And I remember being in Thailand and a tit saying he's had 600 fights. And he said, you train with your partner, no hurt your friend. Why you want to hurt your friend? Don't hurt your friend. And it's like the same thing, you know what I mean? He is your friend. And not only is he your friend, he's giving so much more than both of you realise, you know what I mean? Like you're giving to him, he's giving to you, in brain capacity, you know what I mean? Like with the hard sparring that you were doing, how you're looking after each other, the time away from family, all that stuff. And I think the more that we respect our training partners like that, the less we're going to get into these, kind of wars in the gym that, you just go hard and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, I really like to change the dynamic of the sport like that. You know what I mean? And have such an emphasis on how we treat our sparring partners and stuff like that.
Yeah, because
Like
I mean,
the
a lot of
safety.
the things you're trying to develop with sparring in any sport really is your timing, noticing what they're doing and figuring out ways to counteract it, your movement, practicing techniques, trying to get new things working. And a lot of that stuff you can actually do at 70%, 60%.
Yeah.
Like, when you add that extra power, you're not actually, you're not adding a whole lot, so you don't have to do all your sparring hard, I guess is the other thing. Like, it makes sense to do it every now and again. You have to know that you're able to deal with pressure, but I don't know, and we've talked about this before, like, once you've figured out that you can deal with pressure, I don't know, I don't feel like you keep needing that lesson over and over and over again. Like, if you know you can take 2 hard punches and then still swing back and slip out and move, then you don't need to keep taking 2 hard punches every couple of sessions
yourself
to
when
make sure.
something's landed. When we're in sparring, you know what I mean. You're like, oh, he would have got me there, or whatever. You know what I mean. Like, after a while, you both know. So, what is the point?
But I gotta say, like, because we've been trying really hard. I think we've been doing a pretty good job of having a touch sparring, a light sparring MMA session. But it's hard, like, because it requires a lot of skill, a lot of personal control to manage it. Because normally what happens, and you see it, and I've seen this pattern so many times, is you have 2 guys sparring, they'll be going really light, and then one lands something. He lands a little sneaky, shovel hook or something like that. And then the other guy, he just ups the ante just a little bit. He just goes a little bit harder because he just wants to get the guy back a little bit. Yeah. Now the first guy, he's like, oh, hang on, this bastard's gone harder now, and now he's scored on me. And so then he goes a little harder. And that cycle can never end. Like, it's a cascade, like 10%, then 10%, then 10%. And before you know it, both of them are going at 100%, even if they started at 50. So it takes one of them to, like, basically take the high road and be like, hey, that's all right, and then dial it back again.
Yeah.
But, man, I mean, I've been in there too, and I've done exactly the same thing. You get
100%.
caught in the heat of the moment, and then you want a little bit of revenge, or you're pissed off. And the other thing is people struggle to control as well. Like, they misjudge their distance, or they struggle to kind of modify how hard they go. So you and me are constantly on those sessions, like constantly on people, like, dial it back, chill, relax. And it's gotten pretty good. And I've actually been noticing dudes have been getting better quicker, because guys will actually try new things. You know, that when you're scared of getting clobbered in the head, you either shell up and just protect yourself, or you start clobbering hard, is what I reckon most people do. Yeah. But if you're not actually worried that they're going to hit you hard, if you're worried it's like almost like point fighting kind of thing, you'll start to experiment a little bit. Yeah. You'll start to find a different style you don't normally do. And that's how you learn, by trying new shit. So I think it actually has implications for how to best learn the sport too, is to actually open up, go light. I think if you do that, you have to be smart too. Like, if they touch you on the nose gently, in your head you have to say, that was a hard shot that would have dropped me, and you have to kind of adapt and respect that. So it takes a lot of skill, I reckon, and you have to be a fucking monk to pull it off. So it's
you need to have 2 one coach there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the thing with coaching, you know what I mean? Maybe that is really the important thing about having a coach there, is, protecting you. Because I know that we've talked about this before, like, fighters just fight, you know what I mean? And they kind of need to be protected from themselves almost, whether it's, matchups with dodgy promoters, or whether it's, them just deciding that they're going to go hard, 3 days in a row or something,
Yeah.
I know that Dean, I had a couple of real bad rocks before one of my fights, and Dean completely pulled the pin on me doing any sparring, and that had never happened before. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because we never had really a coach as such in that environment. You know, say that to us. Like, we would have just kept sparring or whatever. But he just said like, no way. You know, and yeah, so maybe you can fix it like that a little bit. But
Yeah, having someone who can make the decisions. Because I know I've had the same thing where you're coaching a sparring session or something, and two guys start going really hard, but both of them consent to it. Both of them are quite happy to go hard, and they're enjoying it. They're having a great time. So, is it my role to say that's not alright? Fuck off. Which is kind of what I've been doing. Yeah, because they don't know what's good for them.
No, it kind of sucks. But that like, if that's what you got to do to protect people, I think that I would much rather see that than see one, like the position that you're in at the moment, or the position that I's in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like, even Charlie, young guy we've got, 17, who wants to do MMA. I canned his fight today, just because the guy was older, bigger, a man with decent striking experience from the sound of it. And honestly, I still think Charlie wins that fight because he's,
Yeah, but why get punched in the head at 17 by a fully grown man?
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
Charlie would have taken that fight too if we had told
100%.
him. Or if it was up to him, he would have taken that fight. So
I was half worried he'd still take it with me telling him not to.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, he wants to get in there. But I couldn't live with myself if I don't, because we have these young kids like that coming up, and they're keen and they're skilled, and it's up to us to tell them what is and isn't sensible, and
hold
to
fast
think
to
about their career.
Yeah.
Not even just their career, their
Their
fucking
life afterwards. Yeah.
Because yeah.
Like, I would tell people to do things like a bunch differently with knee surgeries and all that. Just that, you know what I mean? Let alone without thinking this brain stuff that's coming through. So, yeah, I think it's, the lesson from this is I think that coaching will be one of those things, you know what I mean? You constantly need to be making those hard decisions for people and, taking an active role in telling them no and making sure that they listen to you. Or if they don't want to listen to you, then, I suppose it's up to them to go to a place where, it suits them better. But I can't see myself ever doing that. Like, even the rounds that I did with Ryan Hall, we've talked about this a bunch as well, but, he was saying to me, what's the point, you know what I mean? Our sport's not built for rolling the dice, you know what I mean? Standing in the pocket and swinging hard, so why would you do that at training, you know what I mean? The emphasis should be on, staying away, not getting hit, movement, distance management, the skills that you need to find the easiest path to victory or the safest path to victory, you know what I mean? You're rolling the dice. If you go in there with this attitude that you're just going to swing, you know what I mean? And if you get dropped, you're going to get back up and swing on him. You're just rolling the dice, and that's really at its core. It's not what this sport's about, you know what I mean? It's not what we've done. You think of the shit that we've had to do to gain the experience and the technique that we've got. Like, that we had to use our brains for that. Like, we had to use all that stuff, and to have this kind of mentality of just going in there and swinging hard, it can't happen anymore, I don't think. With the sport, it needs a much more cerebral approach, and I think our approach to sparring needs to be overhauled as a sport as well. That's our thing going off, I think, but that'll be okay.
Yeah. It's a sport that's kind of underlined by toughness. Like, I think something like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu isn't as much about toughness. In fact, it tends to be an insult to tell someone that they're tough or strong in Jiu-Jitsu. You're supposed to say they've got good technique. But you look at that sport at the elite level, like at those, and they are tough as nails, like disgustingly tough. Like, it definitely, at the lower levels, it's definitely easy to be lazy and kind of lay on your back and be chilled out. But at those higher levels, these guys are hustling. But MMA is very much underlined by toughness, which it is. Like, you have to be absolutely tough in that sport because you can lose at any second, and the fight, basically any fight you have is going to go bad at some point. But that doesn't mean that every single one of your training session has to be
No, that's right.
that way. if it's damaging you, that is. Like there's a fine line between dumb and tough, I think. And sometimes I've definitely crossed over into the dumb side.
Yeah. Which is a shame, because I thought that, we were fairly cerebral. I thought that we looked at this with the technique that we did and the drills that we were doing, but still we got sucked into this a little bit, you know what I mean? Every now and then.
Yeah. I mean, I think this has just been a wake-up call for both of us kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so too, and it's still very, very raw. You know what I mean? Like I said, you're going through your stuff. I'm going through my stuff with Si. This Katie Collins, poor girl, just died today as well.
Yeah.
There was a couple of boxers in the last couple of months as well. Like, that's an inherently, dangerous sport of, subconcussive knocks or whatever you want to call them.
I'll be interesting to see what comes out with freestyle wrestling and Greco and stuff.
Yeah.
'Cause there's not much. Like, because I read that the kind of big CTE study where they looked at the brain. They've got this giant brain bank of brains that people donate.
Yeah.
They look for CTE. So it's a lot of NHL players, and I think there was one freestyle. I don't know if it was freestyle, but there was one wrestler in there, and there were quite a few WWE style wrestlers too. And these are guys who, because they've nominated to donate their brain, I think every single one of them knew something was wrong before, They were like, something's not right here. I want to donate to this service so that they can have a look into it. So I'll be interesting if anything comes out with wrestling. I don't know, but on the other hand, it's a sport that not a lot of people do for huge amounts of time either, so maybe that protects it. And
another one that spits people out, you know what I mean? Like, not many people come back to wrestling, after they're...
Yeah. I don't know a great deal of, really, of older retired wrestlers and how they're going. I don't know. I just don't know, man. Maybe it's, maybe the fact that that people retire younger in it or switch sports is protective in it. I don't know. But, I mean, if NHL players are getting it from tackling hard, then you got to think some wrestlers are getting it from basically a double leg is not so different than a tackle, and a snap.
In jiu-jitsu, you're getting smacked in the head quite a bit as well. Every now and then, like you even the last 2 times you hurt your head were through jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? Just a wild headbutt or a knee or something.
Oh, that's what pissed me off is because I've been having these kind of mild cognitive issues for 2 years, and then they'd kind of gotten worse in the last 6 months. I started to slur my words a little bit and get words mixed up in sentences. So I was like, all right, I'm going to cut out the kickboxing because I was doing that. And so I did that. And then it was still kind of happening. So I cut out the wrestling as well. Because what I was noticing, I was still getting knocks. Because when you start to notice that shit, you start to actually do a tally in your mind of, all right, how many times have I been hit hard in the head? And every time it happens, you actually notice it. Whereas previously, I probably wouldn't have noticed it that much. And so I was noticing it happening at kickboxing, even when I was being really careful. Because sometimes I just get paired up with someone and, I zig when I should have zagged and straight into a kick. So I dialed that back a bit. And then same with the wrestling. I remember I was it's day before a wrestling comp, just doing kind of that sort of sparring you do the day before a wrestling comp, not too hard. And I just was wrestling with a bigger guy, and he just spiked me on my head. And so I was like, after that comp, I dialed that back for a bit.
I remember that, actually, yeah.
God, man. Then I was like, jiu-jitsu will be safe. Jiu-jitsu's all right because you're just on the ground the whole time. There's not really much impact. And then 2 times in 1 week, I had a hard face plant onto the mat, my bad, and then a hard head clash. And I think part of it is when you get a little bit dopey from just a concussion or something like that, you haven't recovered from, your balance goes off a bit and it just happens more. So anyway, I was having fucking jiu-jitsu too, which is the gentle art. So so even that, I'm taking some time off that for a little while too, which is kind of nice. I don't think I've taken a month off in years.
Yeah, not far from surgery. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the
even when we travel, we take shit.
Oh yeah.
It's actually crazy when you think about it, how much time we spent obsessing.
Yeah, and it was fun. I go to this physio, because a lot of physios are specialising in concussion and stuff now. And she was like, oh, how many knocks to the head have you had? I was like, oh, do you know what? I've been pretty good. I reckon I can count on one hand how many proper concussions I've had in my career. I've been really careful. And then she's like, all right, well, we're going to go back, a month at a time, just talk about your different sports and what happened. And, man, I was able to list 5 in the last 4 months while I was just being careful. Like, it just happens all the time.
Yeah.
And she was... she mentioned that the minimum amount of time you want to take off for a concussion is 10 days. The minimum.
Dude.
Not after a concussion, after a head knock, like a decent head knock. And that was not a thing I'd do.
No.
Like 10 days off training, that's just not
No way.
that doesn't even register. Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, only for surgery would you take that kind of time off. Like I've taken a bit over 10 days off training now, and I'm itching to get back to training, and not even like take time off. I've still rolled in that time.
Most of the time when you and I say take time off, to a normal person hears that we're not going in, but we're still like going in and like doing light
rolls, drilling something. You're just not going as hard.
Yeah.
Running PTs, even opening up, and sometimes you're like, I'll get on. Like the other day, my legs are still killing me from this Thai fight.
Yeah.
But I was sitting there and somebody was sitting out, so I was like, oh well,
Yeah.
start rolling. So I'm saying that I've had 2 weeks off or whatever, but no way have I had 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
I've rolled straight away in there.
Yeah.
It's just hard to say no. Super obsessive.
Super obsessive. And I mean, you get to a point where you get in this lucky position where people want your help too, and you want to help people, or you have a really good group of training partners, and you always want to give as much as you get. You want to feed in. So a lot of people rely on you, and you rely on a lot of people, so you never want to take much time off.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's sort of a good thing and a bad, like, because God, I mean, think of how many friends we have through this sport. Like, I think basically all of my friends I met through this sport.
Yeah.
Good friends, like,
like weddings and stuff,
Oh,
like
man, like
kids, like, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth mentioning because we've been talking about the dark side of the sport, but like, it's still definitely in the green for me. Like, it's still
for
done
sure.
So much better for my life than it's ever taken away from me. Like the levels of confidence, of fitness, of health. Like even though I'm having some kind of mild issues now, like God, I mean, I can count, like, very rare for me to ever take a sick day.
Yeah.
Like I just don't get sick as much as other people. I'm healthy. We've got this amazing social group of people that we just go and like do fun shit with multiple times a week.
Yeah. And you're constantly watching people grow, watching people achieve goals, you know what I mean? Either goals that they thought they couldn't, or they surprised themselves, or whatever, or goals that they wanted to. It's a great sport like that, I think.
Yeah.
There's plenty of good to do with this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when I started to have some fucking issues, I felt betrayed. Like my best friend had done a sneaky on me.
Damn.
Because it kind of snuck up on me. I was like, you motherfucker. I
Yeah.
didn't think I was having anything happening, but little stuff has sneaked in there.
You feel bad, right? You're like, how did this do that? Or for me as well, it was not that I was confused, that I was like, I thought that I was processing this okay, you know what I mean? I thought I was prepared, and you're just not quite, until you're staring it in the face.
Yeah.
And this is why we wanted to do that, you know what I mean? Not to scare people away from the sport or whatever, but it's definitely a thing that you need to think about. I remember Simon from the gym said to me the other day, he said, oh, dude, after hearing you and John's stories, I'm thinking about maybe not fighting now, And I was like, dude, that's good thoughts to have, you know what I mean? If you're thinking about whether or not to do a dangerous thing, probably means you're a bit smart, you know what I mean? You want to give this serious thought. It's just not something that you just want to jump in and start punching face.
Yeah.
Not at all.
You don't want to get to the point of getting a brutal wake up call before you thought about it. Like you want to think about it. You want to find ways to mitigate it and to make it safer, because there's a million things you can do to make it safer. Like, and there's a million things you can do to make it way worse. And it's once you kind of have a quick think about it, it's not too hard to figure out. which is which. But
I just hope this sport can head in a direction with that. I think with me and you, really we did, man. We tried to get as good as we could across a broad range of sports, you know, because we all know those coaches out there, you know what I mean, or those teams that are just, you know, the lack of knowledge is not quite there, you know what I mean. You know some crazy stuff's going on, whereas I want to see this sport on like a legitimate path, you know what I mean, where, you know what I mean, there are either people have trickled through the sport, there were athletes that know the dangers, you know what I mean, that means that they can coach better, you know, or whether it just means, you know, just raising awareness like this, or...
Yeah, and that's going to happen. I think that's inevitable. It's just how long it takes. Because I think, because you notice it with the Thai stuff, is like it's a really old sport. And so they've had multiple generations of fighters not looking so good when they retire. And so they adapt. Whereas MMA's young. Like it's
super young. 30 years or whatever. Like... The Thais
that's one generation, two generations.
Yeah, they would laugh at us when we sparred because of how hard we sparred, like how hard the shots were to the head over in Thailand. The Thais would just laugh, you know. And that's because, it is a sport that's hundreds of years old. You know, they've seen people and they've adjusted over the years. It might be one of those things that's not fully talked about, but it's definitely trickled down through the sport, you know. That way they just know, because the second you train Thai, they're like, no, we don't go hard like that.
Yeah.
You know? We save that for fights, and I think maybe that's how they have a ton of fights.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've got some issues as well. You know what I mean? Nobody's going to walk out of this without any. But I think it can be mitigated by in the way in which you spar. And those guys are savages. You know what I mean? Like they spar, they're tough as nails. Those dudes, and just because they're having fun and playing, and you know what I mean, kicking hard to the body but not to the head, doesn't mean that they're not tough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just means that they're doing things the right way.
Yeah, they're like joking and laughing.
Joking, laughing, having a good time.
Whenever they land a kick and stuff.
And dude, if anything, what I learned from jiu-jitsu was that is when I thrive, you know what I mean? That's when my technique is good. That's when my technique flows.
Yeah.
When I'm having fun, you know, when my butt's puckered up and I'm like, here we go. I'm just shooting for a takedown. That is all that's happening, you know what I mean? Whereas if I can stand, float, play with my range a little bit, that's when the magic happens with sparring and stuff like that. Not with those hard rounds where you got to bite down and shoot for that double leg. You know what I mean? I know that I can do that. 100%. I know that I can do that.
I remember meeting Royce Gracie when I was like a blue belt or something, or maybe even a white belt, and he was just all about slow rolling. And that dude was like legit as hell, and he got in there.
He's a violent man.
He was a violent man when he needed to be, but you also know that you got to be able to flow, you got to be able to relax, you got to be able to experiment, stuff like that.
Look, it's got to be heading in this direction. The amount of people that I've met through the sport that are very relaxed, well-adjusted people, when this trickles down and we figure out that, you know, these hard rounds aren't the best thing for us, you know, it's gonna go in that direction. People, you can't ignore it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think there'll always be people that go hard or whatever, a different school of thought.
Yeah.
But you look at the Dutch compared to the Thais. You know, like it's very different, Muay Thai versus kickboxing. But those kickboxers go hard. Those Dutch kickboxers, you know, whereas the Thais don't go so hard. But it's gonna be those things.
It's really difficult, man.
But it's gonna it'll work out. I think especially with the light sparring in MMA, like. You've said it yourself, we've talked about this as well, but in a sport that's inherently violent, you can't be violent all the time, you know what I mean? You can't hold that tension amount in you. So most of the time, the professional fighters that I meet through the sport are very relaxed people anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they can't hold that tension. If you hold on to that tension, you'll have a bloody aneurysm. You know what I mean?
It's so true.
Like, bad phrase of words, but you will, you know what I mean?
It's true of every sport I've done, I think. Like, if you walk into a gym and you don't really know them that well, the safest, most chill sparring you're going to have is pick the best guy in the room, do it with him. You know, like, go up to the black belt or go up to the coach, like, because they know their skills. They don't need to swing for the hills. Yeah. You know, they can time a sneaky little uppercut under your arm and just touch you on the chin and just give you a little nod that, you know, like, they don't have anything to prove. They know how to use their skills. Yeah. But I just wanted to kind of vocalize some of the things people notice with concussions or brain injury because it's super subtle, man. And I think we don't talk about it a lot. Like psychologists have a lot of, and neuropsychs and stuff like that have a lot of language for what all these different things are, but you and I don't. And so often you can be experiencing these things and have no idea that it's not normal. And I've noticed it in some guys I know too. Like, yeah, like I know guys who've had a lot of hard head knocks, and they're normally all right, but if they have one beer, then all of a sudden they can't talk properly.
Yeah.
Like their words are all jumbled up. Like that's not a normal experience. So I think even having had some mild issues myself, all these people come forward and tell you about what's happened to them in the past, and these are people you train with all the time, and they've never mentioned it before. So there's a strange thing where we don't talk about it, and another strange thing where we don't necessarily notice it soon. But yeah, lots of people came forward and tell me, oh yeah, I experienced that, and I had this concussion and it lasted for 9 months and it messed me up. But yeah, there's a bunch of different domains people kind of can get stuff on. Like a lot of people, like memory effects is one that you can get, and there's different kinds of memory. They call them like your working memory, your short-term memory, your long-term memory. And so your long-term memory is like, your childhood and stuff like that. It's pretty rare for people to get impairments in that from concussion or brain injury. It has to normally be something pretty bad. Your short-term memory is sort of like, what you did yesterday and what you did this week and stuff like that. And your working memory is kind of like your capacity right now. So it's like how many numbers you can hold in your head.
Yep.
It's sort of it's like your bench space kind of thing. That's where I was noticing a bunch of issues. It's like if you asked me to like get a phone number and off a piece of paper and then put it in my phone, I'd have to keep going back over and over again because I could just feel the numbers falling out of my head. Whereas most people, your average is like around 7 that you can hold in your head, 7 things, 7 digits, 7 whatever. But if you have impairments to your working memory, then all of a sudden you feel like you can't hold that much in there anymore.
Yeah.
And this is something that it can be so subtle that you don't notice it, but all of a sudden you're struggling to do stuff like math in your head because that requires you to hold numbers in there and to move them around. If you're bad at math, fine, but if you're finding you can't do it because all of a sudden that 2 that you were trying to carry is gone, you don't know where it is. Was it a 2? Was it another number? Then that could be that you're having issues there, and it impacts you in all sorts of ways too, that sort of stuff, because you can be having a conversation with someone and you'll just sort of you'll forget what the sentence was before the one you were just talking about, and so you kind of lose track of the conversation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think, I mentioned this to you before, is I think some people, when they start to experience this stuff, they start to not like to talk too much. Like I've met a bunch of fighters who don't, and it could be that that's just their style, but some of them just don't like talking too much. I think you can get to a point where you kind of struggle to get your thoughts in order, and you struggle to, because I know when it's settled a bit for me, but when this was worse, is I really struggled with like metaphors. Like if someone said a metaphor and then continued on with their story, it'd take me a bunch of time to handle the metaphor in my head because I didn't have much sort of space, and then I'd lose track of the conversation. And even stuff like these moments in a conversation where you'd normally have like a little quip or a joke, but you can't remember the one part of it, and then you just miss your moment kind of thing. I remember I had one experience where I had this co-worker that I worked with every day for like a year, and I knew her name 100% because I used it every day. I used her name every day, and I had to stare at her for like 10 minutes on this particular day. I couldn't remember her name, and I had to, in the end, like I was really stubbornly trying to remember it, and in the end I had to go through each letter of the alphabet. I had to go through the alphabet twice to remember what her name was. And like just weird experiences like that in your memory. But the other scary stuff people get is like irritability, like explosiveness, or just like shortness of temper.
Yeah.
And that shit's scary
because that's who you are, you know.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Some of the stuff with brain injury can change your personality, and that is horrifying. Like
Yeah.
that's the scariest shit to me. Like, if I break my arm, if you cut my arm off, I'm still me.
Yeah.
But if you can
Yeah,
injure
there's
who
an
I
element to that.
am, then that's like, yeah. And you hear about people with bad brain injuries even after a bad knockout or after years and years of a hard sport knocking their head around, and their personality changes, and that's terrifying.
Very, very scary, yeah.
Yeah.
Who you are as a person.
Yeah, because brain injuries aren't like, they're not like other injuries. Like, you kind of have this sensation where it's like someone's been in your house and fucking moved around all your furniture and messed the whole
Yeah.
place up. Like, that place is yours, you know, it's precious
Yeah.
to you. You didn't think people could get in there and fuck up all your stuff. You know, it's it's a different level, so it's not something you want to take lightly, I guess.
No.
Is because with a lot of, I mean, not so much with just like an acute concussion that if you take rest that fixes, then you're all good. But for some of the more chronic stuff, is once it's there, it's there. Like, once that damage is done, there's not. I don't know that there's a heap you can do to kind of fix it. And I worry about people who have a shocking wake up call one day that this is the thing that's happening to them, and then realizing that there's not a whole lot they can do to undo it. Like that.
Yeah.
That's not a good.
No, that's a very worrying thing for trying to promote the sport too, you know what I mean? But I suppose that, yeah, by looking at those things or looking out for those things, we can mitigate this as much as we can, or try to help people, you know, realise that these are the things that are happening. I remember Jared saying to me, like a close friend of ours, that he had a really bad knockout from soccer. And just one day, like a year later, I remember him saying to me, I don't think I've ever been the same since that. You know, and that scared me, because I've had some concussion stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That I didn't know at the time either, you know what I mean? Sensitivity to the light afterwards, that kind of thing, you know. I just thought to myself, I just had a headache, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember after one hard sparring session, I went to a mate's place and drank a beer and just passed out for like 13 hours or something, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and if you don't know that stuff, you just don't know that stuff. And, you know, maybe I'm an idiot, you know what I mean? But still, I was unaware.
Yeah.
So, you know, if people know this stuff, you know, like, make sure you do your research about this stuff, I think, you know. You've got to be well across this as much as you're well across your jiu-jitsu, as much as you're well across your techniques for your boxing and stuff. You need to be well across what this sport can potentially do to you and what to look out for, I think, as well.
I think if you know what to look out for, because a lot of this stuff can, if you just take a bit of rest, it can settle. Because, even that, like, because I noticed exactly the same thing. I was incredibly fatigued.
Yeah.
For like a week at a time. I needed just like 12 hours sleep at
Yeah.
night. I was like, what the fuck? Yeah. But if you know that stuff, then all of a sudden you can be like, oh, all right, maybe something's going on here and I need to take a little bit of rest. Like, again, like, there's a bunch of stuff you can do to mitigate it. And there's also, I think there's a bunch of genetic factors too. It seems to be.
That's it
coming
as
out
well.
In the research is.
See, that's it. You never know. Like, it's that funny old saying you hear from fighters, like, it's like you got a punch card and you don't know how many punches you got on your card.
You don't know, yeah.
Yeah, you just don't know. Like, sometimes a fighter goes bad, you know, and you can tell he's punched his ticket too many times.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like that with the brain injury thing, you know. You don't really know how your brain's going to be affected by this.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of hard to tell, so.
And the thing to know with that is, just because you have a teammate who has taken a lot more damage than you and they're fine, doesn't mean you're going to be fine.
Look at Jimmy, he's a genius, man.
Dude's taken so many whacks to the head, but he can play piano and
that's
teaching
right.
himself to code and all that sort of stuff. So I think that dude hit the genetic jackpot.
Maybe me and you not so much.
Maybe I'm a little sensitive because I know plenty of people who've taken way more hard knocks than me. And that's actually the really hard thing too for anyone who goes through this stuff is if you haven't, I don't know, like, people tend to not want to think that it's a thing that's happening, like, because they'll look at that. They'll look at a gym and they'll go, oh, you haven't had as much damage as him, you know, you should be fine. Don't worry about it. It's probably nothing. You know, you probably just need a bit more sleep or something like that. But, yeah, the thing is some people are just more sensitive than others, I think.
You know what I mean?
And if you find out early that you're sensitive, then fucking
just keep an eye on that.
Do something about it, yeah, for sure. Look, so I never thought that he was, sensitive to that either, you know what I mean? But obviously there was something going on there, he was 23 years old.
Aneurysms are scary as fuck. Right?
That's it as well, in your head.
Ticking time bomb in your head.
God, and you just don't know, you know what I mean? I think that was what was scary about my last fight as well. Like I thought to myself, I don't have anything wrong up there, I was fairly careful, I'm almost positive, but then you never really do know what's going on in your brain, you know what I mean? And I think about those couple of times that I was knocked out or whatever, and then maybe I come back to sparring a little bit soon, or maybe too many hard rounds. You just don't know what's going on in your brain, you know what I mean? So you need to mediate that as best as you can by looking out for yourself, for these things that you've been talking about, you know what I mean? All those things to look out for, and also look out for your sparring partners, I think.
Yeah.
100%. I know the me from now on, you know what I mean?
God. I remember I studied like anatomy and that at school, and we were doing dissections and stuff, and I remember being just so shocked at how soft their brain is, because I think a lot of the time when you see them, they've been put in preserve and stuff like that and kind of solidified so that they're that beautiful like shape.
Yeah.
But really, they're soft as fuck. Like if you take one out of a head and put it on a table, it's like a jellyfish. It kind of like it doesn't.
God,
keep
it's so scary, isn't it?
I know, it's so scary.
I remember on that CTE show that was on Netflix, Will Smith got an onion, stuck it in a jar and shook it around in there.
Yeah.
It was like, this is your brain every time you got hit. It just had a little bit of water in there, because I don't think the brain is completely full of water, It's not like the brain's the head's encapsulated in water. But yeah, and that's so scary, you know what I mean? Because I've had some clangers in there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like literally my bell rung.
Yeah.
Very scary.
So we should, I don't know what we're doing with this, but if wherever we post it, we should put a link to the donate page for Sai, what's that guy's name? Jenkins.
Yeah, Jack Jenkins. Yeah, he was running that, which was very good of him.
So he's taking donations.
Yeah. So we'll put a thing for the GoFundMe, and look, maybe it's worth looking through some and linking some of the signs, to look for this brain injury stuff. You know what I mean? As hard as that's going to be, this is what we wanted to do for this, and maybe we find a link to a website for brain injury or something like that, and stuff and we'll link that as well, because this is what we wanted to do with this, wasn't it? We just wanted to promote it.
Yeah.
Put it out there as something that's not talked about, that probably needs a little bit more, you know what I mean, focus.
Yeah, just a little bit more light on it.
A little bit more light on it, a little bit more people talking about it and realising that it is an issue,
Yeah.
And being a tough guy or whatever, or being tough, doesn't help your brain.
Yeah.
Not at all. So you still need to be aware of this stuff. No wonder. And like you said, no matter if your sparring partner next to you is taking crazy shots, your sparring partner is not you either.
Yeah.
You're a completely different human, and his story is probably going to be completely different than yours.
And you are going to be a 60-year-old man at some point in your life.
Yeah, you're going to want to remember your kids. You want to remember, tell your kids these stories as well. You don't want to forget this shit.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to be able to read them a storybook out loud too.
Yeah.
You want to be able to do that stuff. So, yeah, you got to, think about this stuff. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely look after each other. But, yeah, I think that was good.
Yeah, man.
I think we did good by talking about this. It was a hard thing. I think we covered it a lot by not,
Yeah. And we got something where we can direct people, if we've got some young kid coming up through the gym or anything like that, and we're worried about the way he's training or something like that, and have a powwow with them and say, listen to this video.
Yeah.
Listen to this talk and...
about the realities of what happens sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, because we're not going to talk about this every day. Like, you and me are just going to go back into the gym and just do our thing. And that's the hard thing too, is if you get into places where people are trying to follow in your footsteps or look up to you and stuff like that, is then there are parts of you don't want them to follow in those footsteps. So you got to be like, all right, follow these footsteps, but you see these ones here, those are fucking mines.
Yeah, so that's it.
Step on those.
Stay away from them. Yeah, for sure.
Away from those. Yeah.
Oh, that was really good, and I think that might as well me and John are both the owners of Canberra MMA. We've just started up this business, teaching people, combat sports and that kind of thing. So if you're interested, go look at Canberra MMA on Instagram, and